Welcome to our first training video. I thought I'd start by looking at the movements table. We'll look separately at the older installed version and the more recent hosted version because there are significant differences you should understand between the two. We'll start with the older installed version, the Pets Corner version if you like. I'm not actually going to look directly at the underlying movements table. I didn't design the movements table. I don't like the design of the movements table. It works, but it is mighty confusing, and you're doing well if you really truly understand what's going on. I don't. I have to look it up every time. So instead, I've created a set of views which simplify things, rationalize column names, and rejig things somewhat, but it makes it much more digestible. First thing to say is to have a look at the underlying columns and the key columns, sorry, and what they do. The primary key for the movements record is a GUID. We do that because in the install version we have multiple databases across numerous databases, and we need to merge those into the head office database. And the GUID gives us near guaranteed uniqueness. In the original install version, there is a column called terminal ID. Please never use it. It shouldn't be there really. Instead, always use .terminal ID, and in conjunction with .terminal ID, .no, those two columns make up what's visible to the users as the document identity. It's what's printed as a document number. But also in terms of the database, is a unique constraint along with line number. Therefore it's indexed, therefore it's fast to search. .refno is a free text field for customers to use. We record user number against every row, every movement, but you shouldn't inner join against user no, because if the movement's generated by a background process, it may well be 0 rather than a known user, so always left join onto that. Barcode description, we do record barcode description in the vast majority of cases into the movements table, but they're not mandatory fields, so I would recommend if you're creating a report, for instance, or retrieving data to show to a user, you always join back to the barcode and product table to get that information. Quantity is obviously a key column. Can be slightly counterintuitive because what we're recording in the quantity field is the stock change. So you might think that if you sell 2 items in a sale, the quantity would be 2, but it wouldn't. It'd be -2 because we're saying that we have 2 less in stock than we did before the sale. Conversely, when you book stock in, that will be a plus. So goods in for supply will be a plus. Price, cost, and VAT code again are present in most records, but they're not mandatory fields. GUID sut will only be non-null if it's a goods in for supplier, goods returned to supplier. Tran type is obviously key, which tells you whether it's a sale or a goods in or a stock take or a write-off and so on. To help understand what that value means, that's a tiny int. I've put into the view a more easily digestible form of that, the description out of the X tran type table. The other most important field is, well, I've labelled it effects warehouse now. When the movement is inserted, this is the warehouse number, this is the warehouse for which the stock will be changed. This is a particular area of complication. I won't even try and explain it, so just go by this view and you can be sure that effects warehouse now is the warehouse that is affected by the creation of this movement. In majority cases, the effects warehouse location will be -1 times the effects warehouse number. That's because majority of cases we're just selling or moving out of goods, what we call goods in, which is a default location. However, if you look at the data produced in a warehouse environment, that will change depending on the picking location or the stock location within the distribution warehouse. There is a secondary warehouse node column, which I've called out warehouse now. That will only be present where there's where the movement type, the transaction type, is is a transfer in or out to another branch. Key thing to remember with movements is that we never directly change the stock table. We change stock by inserting a movement which, via an on-insert trigger, updates the stock. You should never ever update their stock table directly. So that's the basics of the movements view. So I would always recommend to use the view. If it's not present on a system, then there will be a script I will provide which allow you to install them as needed. There's a slight variation of VW movements all, which just provides some extra information, so it's probably the more useful one to use because it provides a view of the actual warehouse descriptions and supplier names, user subcode as well, just for easy reference. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same, just some extra information and a description for the reason as well. There you go, just there. There are some additional fields which I won't go into now, but we will return to in a future video. Now we're going to take a look at the hosted variation of this. As you can probably tell, I don't like the design of the movements table in the installed version, the Pets Corner version. So when we came to create the hosted version, we took the opportunity to change the movements table, which is it's the biggest difference between the two systems, but it's so fundamental it was worth the pain. So in the original version, we've just got the movements table. In the hosted version, we took the opportunity to break it down into a very familiar pattern of header and det. So in the header, you've got the document number, you've got things like the supplier information, the user, the warehouses that it affects, and so on and so forth. And then in the move, you've just got obviously one row of those, and then you've got multiple rows of the det table. It's a familiar pattern. It works really well and reduces the amount of silly duplication we get with the old version of the table. It's very similar, but I'll just point out some of the differences. So let's point to the results. So because we've got a header and det table, we've got two GUIDs. We've got a GUID, which I've called for the sake of the view GUID_header, and we've also got a GUID for the movements det. We have, let's have a look. We have in the header, we have a new det count, which allows us to record the fact that for a given header we should have X number of rows. The examples here aren't very good. They're one each, but it could be 10 if you've got 10 rows in movement det. Although we never move things around, rarely move things around in the hosted version, it does give us a sort of opportunity to validate the data should we need to. Couple of new columns. Sometimes we need to tie other information to the movement via a GUID or secondary information to the movement, in which case we've now got a GUID xref at header level. And there's some scenarios, particularly at Bowden, where they palletize or package up goods with a barcode on the shrink wrap the container, and that's that barcode which they can scan and retrieve, find the movement for it or the transfer in. Pretty much it's otherwise the same. There are 3 variations of these movements, so movement views. So I've created a VW_movements just to be compatible with any code written for the installed version, and then there's two variations here, like the other 2 views that I showed you in the installed version. The movements all just gives you a bit of extra information. Hopefully that's of use. Before we finish up though, I'm just going to show you a new feature, a new inquiry, which will turn into a report for customers to run, but in the short term it's just a stored procedure. A lot of inquiries we get are because users find it difficult to see why things happened at a particular point and what the stocks were at that point. And this stored procedure is, I've called it tracks utility underscore stock rewind. It allows you for a given date range to see why the stock became to be what it is. So we pass in a date, a start date. It's always from that start date to now. The warehouse number and a specific product. It's all about a specific product. And this is what we get out. So we obviously get a listing with the most recent transaction first, the type of description, some additional information that could be a secondary warehouse if it's a transfer in, transfer out, or a supplier if it's goods in or goods returned. Doc.ref now can sometimes be useful. Document number, then the stock change. So if we work from the bottom upwards, this is a PPP movement. So we had a stock take on adjustment of +2, after which the stock in the system was 2. We then had a sale, so a stock change of -1, which reduced the overall stock to 1, and so on and so forth until you get to that figure there, 4, which is the current stock position for that product at that warehouse. So you can see across those movements over time how stock changed and why they changed. Because it's new, it's not going to be in any production databases, but I will provide some notes to go with this video and some scripts to allow you to install it where it's not already present. It'll be installed automatically though as we update systems. Hope that's been useful.